They came with no warning, no banners, no sound, only the trembling of the earth under 1,000 hooves. On that night, the world didn't know an army was coming. It felt a storm. In the early 13th century, a shadow rose from the frozen steppes of Mongolia, silent, relentless, and unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed. They were riders who moved faster than rumors, archers whose arrows curved with the wind, warriors who believed the sky itself had chosen them. Kingdoms that had survived for centuries collapsed in weeks. Cities that once glittered with gold turned to ash. And across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, rulers whispered the same helpless question: who can stop them? This is the night the world trembled. This is the Mongol Storm. Chapter 1. The night the steppe came alive. They say the steppe sleeps under an endless sky, a quiet world of wind, frost, and grass that whispers like an ancient spirit. But on some nights, the steppe does not sleep. On some nights, it awakens. In the 12th century, long before the Mongols became a storm, these lands were a battlefield of broken tribes. Clans fought for water, for horses, for honor, sometimes for nothing at all. Children grew up knowing the taste of hunger, the sound of betrayal, the cold of winter burials. Life on the steppe didn't just test you, it carved you. And into this harsh world, a boy was born. His name was Temujin. He did not arrive as a conqueror. He arrived chained in fear, his father poisoned, his family cast out, his tribe abandoning them to die in the snow. Temujin learned his first lessons before he could even hold a bow. Trust no one, rely on no one, and survive at any cost. While other children played with wooden arrows, Temujin carried a flint knife because he expected someone to take his life before sunrise. While others slept by warm fires, he slept under a sky so cold it cracked the bones of men. And yet, in that unforgiving world, he found something no one else saw. He found possibility. He watched the tribes tear each other apart, watched leaders rise only to fall by the hands of jealous rivals. The steppe taught him a truth older than history itself. A world divided cannot survive, but a world united can rule everything. Temujin learned the language of loyalty, not through comfort, but through pain. He rescued brothers who once abandoned him. He forgave rivals who expected death. And slowly, the winds began to shift. Around him gathered men who had no place in the old steppe, broken warriors, orphans, outcasts. They followed Temujin because he offered something no chieftain ever had, not bloodlines, not wealth, but merit. And that single idea, reward the strong, punish betrayal, protect the loyal, became the spine of an empire. As Temujin grew, the steppe itself seemed to stir. Old clans felt the pressure. New whispers traveled with the riders. There is a young wolf rising. The sky, what the Mongols called the eternal blue heaven, felt heavier, as if watching him. Then came the night when the steppe truly awakened. Torches burned across the horizon. Riders gathered like shadows. Banners of every clan, normally enemies, stood side by side. In that moment, Temujin was no longer merely a survivor. He was no longer a boy seeking justice. He was chosen by the people, chosen by destiny, chosen, so they believed, by the eternal blue sky itself. And with one proclamation, the fate of continents changed. From this day, Temujin shall be known as Genghis Khan. The steppe erupted with the roar of thousands. The storm had awakened, and soon the world would tremble. Chapter 2. The Iron Riders of the Eternal Blue Sky. When the world first heard the thunder of Mongol hooves, it didn't sound like an army. It sounded like the sky cracking open. Under the eternal blue sky, the Mongols became something more than warriors. They became a machine, a living, breathing force built on speed, discipline, and a kind of cold precision the medieval world had never seen. They were riders before they learned to walk. At 4 years old, a Mongol child could gallop across the steppe without falling. By 5, they could fire arrows backward while the horse was still in full sprint. Every boy grew up with a bow heavier than his own weight, and yet he could bend it because survival demanded it. Their secret weapon was not brute strength, it was movement. A Mongol horseman carried no heavy armor, no decorated shield, but he carried 5 horses, each trained to switch mid-battle so he never grew tired. The enemy faced warriors who never slowed, never rested, never stopped. While other armies marched miles a day, the Mongols crossed continents before sunrise. And then there was the bow. The Mongol composite bow could kill a man at distances other armies considered impossible. It could pierce armor. It could bend in winter when wooden bows froze and shattered. And in the hands of a rider, it was terrifying. But the true horror lay not in their weapons. It lay in their intelligence. Before a single arrow flew, Mongol scouts mapped the land, the rivers, the weather, and the weaknesses of kings who believed their castles were safe. They rode ahead for weeks, sometimes months, gathering every rumor, every whisper. Nothing was too small: a broken bridge, a jealous prince, a weak gate, a starving village. The Mongols saw opportunity where others saw nothing. Then came their most deadly tactic, the feigned retreat. They would pretend to panic, pretend to flee, pretend to shatter. And as their enemies cheered and chased, believing victory was theirs, the Mongols turned, formed a perfect crescent, and rained arrows like a black storm. Armies 3 times their size dissolved in minutes. Those who survived spread the stories. They ride like spirits. They shoot without missing. They appear and vanish like smoke. And that fear became a weapon far sharper than any blade. Even their communication system was unmatched. Along the empire stretched thousands of relay stations. The Yam, a postal highway that delivered messages faster than any kingdom on earth. An order from Genghis Khan could cross an entire continent in days. To fight the Mongols was to fight the wind. To outrun them was to outrun the sky. To resist them was to invite annihilation. Europe called them devils. China called them barbarians. The Middle East called them the punishment of God. But the Mongols called themselves something else, the Iron Riders of the eternal blue sky. And their storm was only beginning. Chapter 3. The Fall of Civilizations. When empires bowed. When the Mongol storm finally rolled out of the steppe, it did not come softly. It came like a hammer striking ancient stone. And one by one, the world's proudest civilizations shattered. The first to feel the full fury was the Khwarezm Empire, a kingdom so vast and wealthy that its ruler believed no force on earth could touch him. He was wrong. It began with a single insult. A trade caravan captured, its merchants killed. Genghis Khan demanded justice. The Shah laughed. He executed the Mongol envoys and sent their bearded heads back across the desert, believing the steppe nomads were nothing more than pests. He didn't know he had just opened the gates of hell. What followed was not a war, it was a judgment. Samarkand fell. Bukhara fell. Nishapur burned so completely that Mongol chroniclers wrote, "We left not one cat or dog alive." The Khwarezm Empire, once a giant of the Muslim world, was erased in months, not years, months. From there, the storm rolled east. In China, the Jin dynasty, an empire of millions, fortified its walls and waited. They trusted their size, their gold, their ancient war machines. But the Mongols simply adapted. They studied Chinese engineers, stole their siege technology, and turned it back against them. Zhongdu, modern Beijing, burned for days. Smoke choked the sky. Refugees fled in rivers of fire. And when the gates finally broke, the city that once ruled northern China became another grave under Mongol hooves. Then came Central Asia, where cities glittered with blue tiles and scholars debated under moonlit courtyards. Merv, Urgench, Balkh, all wiped away as if history itself were being rewritten by a brutal new pen. But perhaps no land shook with more fear than Russia. The princes of Rus, divided by rivalry and pride, thought their forests and frozen rivers would protect them. The Mongols rode across them like shadows on snow. The city of Ryazan begged for mercy. Moscow was burned to ashes. Kiev, the jewel of Eastern Europe, was reduced to silence so complete that travelers later wrote, "You could walk through the city without hearing a human voice." Everywhere the story was the same. Armies that had survived centuries collapsed in a single afternoon. Kings who once dined in gold fled into forests, praying the storm would pass them by. Civilizations that believed themselves eternal learned that nothing is eternal, not walls, not crowns, not empires. And yet, the Mongols did not destroy blindly. They spared artisans, engineers, scholars. They kept trade routes alive. They opened roads that had been closed for generations. But for those who resisted, for those who dared defy the riders of the eternal blue sky, there was no negotiation, no treaty, no mercy. This was the age when empires bowed, not to gods, not to destiny, but to a force that rode like lightning and struck like thunder. This was the Mongol Storm, and the world had only begun to tremble. Chapter 4. The Day. Europe held its breath. Europe had always feared invasions, the Huns, the Vikings, the Saracens. But none of them carried the cold silence that rode with the Mongols. None of them moved like ghosts across continents. By the winter of 1241, whispers drifted over the Carpathian Mountains. They are coming, the horsemen of the end. The first blow fell on Poland. At Legnica, European knights, steel-clad, fearless, armed with centuries of battlefield pride, charged with righteous fury. They expected the Mongols to break. Instead, the Mongols simply opened their ranks, released clouds of black smoke, and surrounded the knights in a deadly circle. When the wind cleared, Europe witnessed a sight it had never imagined, the flower of Polish nobility lying silent under a rain of arrows. But this was only a distraction. The real strike came farther south. The Mongols swept into Hungary like a tidal wave. At the Battle of Mohi, King Bela IV marshaled one of the largest armies Europe had ever assembled. Priests blessed the soldiers. Knights tightened their armor. The king believed numbers and faith would save them. Then the Mongols attacked, not from the front, not from the sides, but from everywhere at once. They broke the bridges. They flooded the riverbanks. They trapped an entire army in a deadly bowl of fire and smoke. When dawn arrived, the Hungarian kingdom, one of Europe's proudest, had been torn open like parchment in a storm. For the first time in centuries, Europe felt helpless. Farmers abandoned their fields. Monks wrote panicked chronicles. Kings who had quarreled for decades suddenly began sending letters, pleading for alliance. Even the Pope issued desperate warnings, calling the Mongols a scourge permitted by heaven. And deep inside stone castles, Old men spoke the truth in trembling voices. If the riders reach Vienna, if they reach the Rhine, Europe is finished. The Mongols were only days away from doing exactly that. Their scouts had already mapped Germany. Their generals debated whether to push straight toward Italy or sweep across France. No army stood ready to stop them. Then, without warning, the storm halted. The riders turned back, the camps emptied, the hooves faded into the eastern wind. Europe survived not because it was strong, not because it was brave, but because fate intervened. Far away on the Mongolian steppe, the great Khan Ogadai had died, and Mongol law demanded every prince return home to elect a new leader. So the greatest invasion Europe had ever faced collapsed not by war, but by a death thousands of miles away. Europe would rebuild. Europe would recover, but it never forgot the year when kings hid behind walls, and the world's mightiest horsemen stood at the gates. That silent moment, when the riders paused, watching the western horizon, was the night Europe held its breath. Chapter 5. The Legacy of the Storm. Order in the Ashes. When the dust settled, the world seemed unrecognizable. Cities lay in ruins, fields were abandoned, empires that had ruled for centuries had crumbled to ash. Yet in the heart of destruction, something extraordinary emerged. The Mongol Storm had not only destroyed, it had reshaped. Trade routes that had lain dormant for generations suddenly thrived under Mongol control. The Silk Road became a lifeline connecting Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Merchants traveled under the protection of the Khan's riders, carrying silk, spices, and gold, but also ideas, inventions, and knowledge. The printing press, gunpowder, and new astronomical ideas flowed from east to west, transforming the medieval world forever. Religion, too, found a strange tolerance under the Mongols. Unlike the rigid empires they had conquered, the Mongols allowed Jews, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, and shamans to worship freely, so long as they paid tribute and remained loyal. This radical openness encouraged cultural exchange unseen in the Western world for centuries. Even governance evolved. The Mongols established the yam, a system of relay stations and couriers that allowed messages to travel hundreds of miles in days, a medieval superhighway connecting distant corners of the empire. Kings and sultans found themselves forced to negotiate with the riders not as barbarians, but as rulers, whose efficiency rivaled the greatest kingdoms on earth. Yet the most enduring legacy was fear. Across continents, stories of Mongol ruthlessness became cautionary legends. Parents whispered them to children. Kings read them in trembling halls. Temples and libraries learned that defiance could bring annihilation. And through that fear, the Mongols commanded obedience without occupying every inch of land. But fear alone could not account for the empire's success. It was the meritocracy that Genghis Khan had built, the idea that loyalty and ability mattered more than birthright. Generals rose through skill, not lineage. Administrators ruled based on competence, not inheritance. This principle would echo through centuries of governance and influence leaders far beyond Mongolia. And yet, despite all their power, the Mongols faded into the horizon of history. They did not last forever, but their mark endured. They had shown the world what a single, determined force could achieve, the terrifying beauty of unity, discipline, and relentless ambition. In the end, the storm left a paradox: destruction and creation, terror and opportunity, death and order. It reminded humanity that empires could fall, but the lessons of their rise and devastation would ripple for centuries. The Mongol Storm had passed, but its shadow lingered. The world had trembled, and in that trembling, it learned a new rhythm. A rhythm of power, fear, and ambition. One that would shape civilizations long after the hooves of the Iron Riders faded into the eternal blue sky. And that was the tale of the Mongol Storm. The day the world trembled. From the frozen steppes to the gates of Europe, the riders of the eternal blue sky showed us the power of ambition, fear, and destiny. If you felt the thunder of the hooves, the whisper of empires, and the shadows of history tonight, then don't let the story end here. Subscribe to Midnight Empire for more lost kingdoms, forgotten emperors, and the mysteries of the night. Because history isn't just in books, it's waiting to haunt your dreams.